All right, good morning and welcome everyone to our Friday program, Eastern Energy Expo 2020 on demand. This morning's program is going to be discussing the Transportation and Climate Initiative. For those of you that were with us on Tuesday of this week, we had a discussion about the carbon policies that are being adopted in many of the states in the Northeast. And there was a little bit of discussion about TCI in that framework, but it wasn't a discussion on TCI per se. That's what we're going to be discussing this morning. We're very, very fortunate to have three individuals that are going to offer us unique perspectives on TCI from various vantage points. The first is John Ike from the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, talking about TCI from the refiner's perspective. Moving down our vertical, we have my colleague and dear friend, Ellen Valentino from the state of Maryland and Delaware. She's the CEO of the MAPTA group representing petroleum distributors in Delaware and Maryland. So we're going to look at TCI from our industry perspective, from refining, from distribution, and then we're going to move outside of our industry, but stay within the business community. We have Mike O'Halloran from the National Federation of Independent Business. He's the director for Maryland and Delaware, and he will be talking about TCI from the perspective of businesses being impacted, but not businesses that are in the fuel industry per se, but just the impact that this will have from an economic perspective. So, and that's the order that we're going to go. We're going to go upstream in our industry, or at least the refining, the industry, petroleum distribution, and then over to general business. Remember, you may ask questions using the question function that you see here. We will be monitoring them and ask them at appropriate times during the presentation and certainly at the end. So we're going to start in a moment with John. John Ike is manager of state and local outreach for the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, where he manages the organization's state and local outreach initiatives in the southeastern United States. AFPM is a trade association representing the producers of virtually the entire domestic supply of gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other fuels, as well as the petrochemicals used as building blocks for thousands of everyday products. Prior to joining AFPM, John was the director of Energy, Environment, and Agriculture at the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which is a nonpartisan voluntary membership organization of state legislators dedicated to advancing the principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism, i.e. the good guys. John holds a BA in political science and public policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and we have had an extensive discussion offline about the merits of North Carolina versus that other school. Well, there's two other schools that are in close proximity, but the one that everybody doesn't like except for Ellen. Next is my colleague, Ellen, what do you say about Ellen Valentino? She's fantastic with a capital F. She is my colleague in the Middle Atlantic. She is a friend in PMAA, which is our national organization, and outside of PMAA. And she is a dog on a bone when it comes to fighting on behalf of petroleum distributors, and we are all very fortunate to have her. Lastly, our third panelist is Mike O'Halloran. His role as a state director, he serves as a chief lobbyist for NFIB in Maryland and Delaware. He is responsible for NFIB's mission of promoting and protecting the right of members to own, operate, and grow their business, i.e. the good guys. To that end, Mike lobbies the General Assemblies and administrations in Annapolis and Dover on small business issues, including tax policy, environmental regulations, and workforce guidelines. Prior to joining NFIB, Mike served as government affairs manager for, oh, I didn't know that, AHRI. So he's got some familiarity of the Air Conditioning Institute. There he lobbied state legislatures on issues impacting manufacturers of HVAC, commercial refrigeration, and water heating equipment. He also served as chief of staff to Maryland's current budget secretary, David Brinkley, when he was minority leader in the state Senate. He's a graduate of Salisbury University with a bachelor's in political science. So two good guys and one fantastic woman with us. And without any further ado, provided I can do this technologically properly, I am going to hand this off to John Ike. to get us started. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today and giving me a few minutes of your time. I hope everybody is happy and healthy and doing well in these, dare I say, interesting times. But as Eric said, I wanted to give everybody a kind of a brief overview of the Transportation Climate Initiative, kind of a high-level perspective of what exactly this program is, what has happened to date, and kind of where we see things going from now. So to begin, what is the Transportation Climate Initiative? Well, to be fairly simple about it, it's a regional collaboration of 12 states in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, plus Washington, D.C., that are being led by the Georgetown Climate Center, which is affiliated with the law school at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., that collectively are seeking to improve the transportation systems in these respective states, to develop the clean energy economy, and to ultimately reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector. Now, TCI has existed, at least on paper, since really 2010, but they really, I guess, began in earnest to create an emissions trading cap and invest program just within the last few years. So I think you can say that all really started in November of 2017 at the UN Climate Conference, the annual UN Climate Conference in Bonn, Germany, where several governors of 8 jurisdictions agreed to seek input into the process of moving towards a cleaner transportation future. By this time, President Trump had already signaled that he was going to be withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, and these governors cited what they considered to be a lack of federal leadership on the climate change issue as reasons for why they needed to proceed with such a program. So in the spring and summer of 2018, lost my PowerPoint here. Sorry about that. So in the spring and summer of 2018, the Georgetown Climate Center agreed to hold listening sessions in all 8 of the jurisdictions that participated at the UN Climate Conference. Hearings were only held in 4 of those jurisdictions. I believe they were held in Boston, New York City, Delaware, and there was one in Maryland that was held in College Park. So a lot of these listening sessions were held in major metropolitan areas where perhaps residents aren't as reliant on cars and in college towns. So you're probably going to attract a certain type of individual to show up to participate in these listening sessions. Later that year, 10 jurisdictions announced their intent to create a regional policy proposal that would cap and reduce carbon emissions from the combustion of transportation fuels and to invest the proceeds of those emission allowances into a low carbon and more resilient transportation program. Notably, the states of Maine, New Hampshire, and New York did not sign on to the statement of principles. They are technically considered to be members of TCI, but they, at this point in time, did not sign on to this slate of principles. In the spring of 2019, the Georgetown Climate Center and TCI held 3 workshops, expanding on those initial listening sessions. Each of these workshops focused on a different facet of a proposed program, including program design, which was held in Boston, Massachusetts, discussion about equity and opportunity for all communities, and environmental justice, which was held in Newark, New Jersey, and then finally low carbon transportation investments. How are we going to reinvest the proceeds from an emissions trading scheme? And that was held in Baltimore, Maryland. So this past summer, TCI leadership was supposed to review the feedback provided from these 3 workshops. And then in December of 2019, they released a draft memorandum of understanding, as well as some modeling for a proposed emissions trading system. And then in February 2020, a comment period closed that was open to the general public ASTM submitted comments to the Georgetown Climate Center and the TCI states about their draft MOU, as well as several other entities and individual consumers. So I want to jump real quick into some of the modeling in that draft MOU. So Georgetown Climate Center and the TCI states considered 3 possible cap reduction scenarios. So a 20% cap reduction from 2022 levels to 2032, a 22% cap reduction during that same period of time, and a 25% cap reduction during that same period of time. Now, notably, they used a 19% reference case scenario, which takes into account ever-increasing fuel efficiency for internal combustion engines, the CAFE standards, more and more consumers transitioning to electric vehicles and that sort of thing. So really, if we're using 19% as a reference based study, we're really talking about an additional 1% to 6% reduction as a result of the TCI program. Now, the Georgetown Climate Center did, use that 19% reference case with the caveat that it could end up being lower, perhaps as low as 6% business as usual, based on, whether or not the CAFE standards are rolled back, which the Trump administration has done pending litigation, or if oil prices were to fall, thus perhaps compelling fewer people to transition to electric vehicles if the cost of running an internal combustion engine remains affordable. And so when we look at their modeling for each of those cap reduction scenarios, the Georgetown Climate Center used 3 or 4 different models and combined them together in a kind of a complicated way to determine that GDP growth and individuals' disposable income, as well as jobs, will increase modestly as a result of this program. I think it's fair to perhaps express some skepticism, to have some skepticism about that, but that they also suggested that there would be some significant reductions in asthma as well as premature death as a result of these various cap reductions being implemented. Now, I think what's most important for each of these cap reductions is what they estimate the price of gasoline must increase by per gallon in order to achieve those cap reductions. So for a 20% cap reduction, you'll see that they expect that to necessitate about a 5-cent increase per gallon in 2022 that would increase from there by 2032. And so for a 22% cap reduction, that would necessitate a 9-cent per gallon gas tax increase. And then for 25% reduction, that would necessitate a 17-cent increase by 2022, increasing from there to 2032. Now, again, these are Georgetown Climate Center and TCI projections, so I think it's fair to suspect that the ultimate numbers may actually be higher than that. And again, if they're using 19 cents or a 19% reference case as business as usual, you're really only going to see a 1% additional reduction than what was expected in greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going to cost you 5 cents. For an additional 6% reduction, it's going to cost you that 17 cents there. So obviously, 5 cents per gallon might not seem like a whole heck of a lot in the abstract, but when you're talking about having to fill up an entire tank several times over the course of a year, needless to say, that can certainly add up pretty quickly. So along with the modeling that was released, we also had a draft MOU that was released at the same time. This draft MOU gave us an idea of what we can expect from the program, but also had left a number of questions unanswered. So some of the stuff that we do know or feel are pretty likely to be the case. The first is that TCI will be a separate and distinct program from RGGI. Now, if you remember my very first slide where you saw a map of the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states that were participating, all of those states, except for Pennsylvania, are currently members of RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is an emission trading scheme for stationary sources, so for fossil fuel-fired power plants. Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania is trying to get Pennsylvania to join the RGGI program. So there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the states that currently participate in RGGI and may eventually participate in RGGI, and those that may ultimately participate in a similar program for the transportation sector. TCI will not expand beyond a cap and trade or cap and invest program. They're not going to make any recommendations on mandates for zero emission vehicles, low emission vehicles, low carbon fuel standards, or anything of that nature. It's going to be fairly narrowly tailored to just that cap and invest program. The affected fuels will be gasoline and diesel only. So jet fuel, marine fuel, home heating oil, and other forms of fuel will not be affected by this program. The regulated entities will likely be the state fuel suppliers. So these are entities that bring the affected fuels, so gasoline and diesel, into the participating jurisdictions. We think that initially TCI were wanting to just regulate refineries. The northernmost refinery in the U.S. is actually in New Jersey, so there are a number of states in the TCI footprint that do not have refineries, and the vast majority of those actually import their refined products from overseas, mostly from Canada. So it'd be hard to regulate foreign entities in that respect. So they have signaled that they will likely be regulating the state fuel suppliers, those entities that actually bring the fuel into the participating markets. Excuse me. And then finally, to ensure maximum flexibility, they want to provide for a 3-year compliance period. So those regulated entities would have 3 years to acquire the necessary emission allowances in order to comply with the program. There will be unlimited banking from year to year. So regulated entities could theoretically purchase a number of allowances in a single year and apply those for several years further down the line. And then there will be limited opportunities for offsets. So those regulated entities could invest in other emissions reduction programs, receive credit for that, and then in a limited manner apply that to their TCI compliance. That said, there are a number of questions that remain as to what the final TCI program will look like. What will the cap level eventually be? Will it be the 20, or will it be the 20%, the 22%, the 25% reduction from 2022 levels by 2032, or might it be something else? And then perhaps most interestingly, how will this be apportioned by the states? So I have here Massachusetts, Maryland, New York versus Maine, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Really, that's a kind of a more of a question about urbanized states versus more rural states. So, residents in Maine, Pennsylvania, and Virginia might live in more rural areas. They may be more reliant on cars to go to the grocery store or to commute to work and that sort of thing. So presumably they are consuming more gasoline. They might be more affected by increased gasoline prices and would presumably be affected to a greater extent by the TCI program than those who might live in more urbanized areas and take public transit or have less distance to travel to work every single day. What will the scheduled reductions be? Will those reductions between 2022 and 2032, decrease at the same rate, or might they start off slow and then ramp up as we get closer to 2032? Precisely what format will the auctions take? The RGGI auctions take place on a quarterly basis. Will the TCI auctions also take place on a quarterly basis, or might they take place on an annual basis? Will there be a minimum reserve price to essentially establish a floor for the price of emission allowances to make sure that those prices don't fall below a certain threshold level? What other entities might have reporting requirements in addition to those state suppliers? And if so, what might those look like? And then finally, will there be a cost containment reserve if the price of compliance with the program begins to spiral out of control? Will there be a mechanism by which TCI can sell additional allowances to lower the price of those emission allowances at auction? And so the timeline going forward, we were expecting the spring of this year, 2020, for a final memorandum of understanding to be released by the Georgetown Climate Center, and for that document to then be open to the governors in the participating jurisdictions to sign on to. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, they have backed that estimated time to the fall of this year. And so right around that, but they assure us that despite the pandemic, they are continuing to work on a model rule that will be released at the latest on December 31st in 2020, at which point that model rule will then be formally submitted to the states for consideration. In 2021, they expect the states to adopt the rule. In some states, this will have to be done probably by legislative vote. I think Virginia is going to be one of the states that requires that legislative vote. In other states, governors have wide latitude to, join these sorts of programs. So the governor of Massachusetts, Governor Baker, could probably join this program via administrative rule. And then after the rules adopted in 2021, January 1st, 2022 is the targeted date for the program to start. Now, this could all theoretically change based on, what comes out of that final MOU when it's released later this fall. They may decide to push this stuff back because of the pandemic and the impact it's having on everything, to say nothing of state budgets. So we will have to wait and see there. And so finally, perhaps on a somewhat positive note, wanted to end on with a kind of a brief survey of what some policymakers have said about the TCI program and their state's potential participation in this program. So Governor Sununu in New Hampshire has withdrawn from this program. Interestingly, and kind of funnily enough, he actually made this announcement at the same time that the Georgetown Climate Center was releasing their modeling and their draft MOU on a webinar. So he almost perfectly timed his announcements for that particular event. In neighboring Vermont, Governor Phil Scott has expressed opposition to any programs that will raise gas prices. He reiterated this position in his State of the State address earlier this year without explicitly using the Transportation Climate Initiative, or TCI, by name. In Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont has said that TCI is effectively a gas tax and, quote, probably not the way to go. In Maine, Governor Janet Mills is taking what she calls a cautious approach with the TCI program, given how rural certain parts of her state are and how reliant on many of her citizens are in terms of, driving several miles every day to commute to work and that sort of thing. And then in Rhode Island, the Speaker of the House has said that the TCI program will be looked at very skeptically by the legislature. So I think the final takeaway here is that there are a number of policymakers that remain skeptical of this program or has significant concerns. And perhaps more interestingly, this is a bipartisan perspective. So Republican policymakers as well as Democratic policymakers had a lot of remaining questions about the TCI program, what it might look like, and whether or not it makes sense for their states to participate. So that about covers my presentation. I know we'll be doing a little Q&A after everybody's had a chance to speak, but there's my contact information there as well, in case you wanted to touch base offline as well. So with that, Eric, I'll turn the program back to you and let the rest of my panelists have a go at it.
John, thank you. Reminder to all of our attendees to use the question function in the webinar, in your dialog box. So now from upstream at the refinery to, midstream, downstream us, Ellen Valentino, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Sarah. John, that was a great detailed presentation about sort of the status of affairs. As an organization, distributors and jobbers, we could not be more concerned. And I just think as an industry in our channel of scope, I guess, the simple reason is if the goal is to reduce the sale of the business we're in by 30%, that in and of itself is going to raise our heads, raise our interest, regardless of what the goal is to take an industry of business owners and energy distributors and turn them upside down on their head. Draws our attention. With respect to TCI and its impact on our industry, you're right, you covered a number of issues. First and foremost is the issue of how they plan to accomplish this goal. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, we've renamed it the Cap, Tax, and Spend program. So I think you can look at it within that perspective. I mean, the impact of this proposal is going to increase gasoline prices fairly significantly, which is why I think you see governors and administrations, I want to say, taking a step back, taking a pause, because when this thing rolled out, I think the sticker shock was a little more than maybe some anticipated, even in the Democratic administration. So with that, we are concerned about costs. We are concerned about product availability. I mean, the issue becomes, the big issue is what happens when the allegations run out? I mean, there were simple questions. TCA went to a tremendous extent, at least the internal workings of TCI, to produce modeling, to produce cost analysis, to produce its impact on how many lives it would save in car accidents, because there would be less cars on the road. But the simplest questions they were unable to respond to. One is, what happens when the cap runs out? What happens with respect to allocations? And what happens if it simply doesn't work? They continue to point to California. And I think when you scratch just with the simplest issues, at least from our channel of perspective, they begin to flail with respect to response. But with that said, one of the things we're doing as an industry and as an association is working hard to make sure our members are informed on what the impacts are going to be, at least as we know today. You're right, one of the biggest concerns, not just on supply and the reduction of our business as a whole, but who's going to be responsible for the record keeping? Who's going to be responsible for the entire administrative burden and overlay that would lay down on this? We have, who's going to be responsible to the consumers? A gasoline price increase such as this, I think in our industry, we all know people cross the street for a half a cent. So that's been, some of our messaging and focus. Like I said, I think keeping our members involved, doing some polling to the consumers, so we have some way of breaking what has been historically, a sheet of ice, and talking to policymakers. It all sounds good, that they're going to use these monies to develop programs so that people can ride bikes, walk to work. And I say this not tongue in cheek. These are the conversations that were happening within these meetings. And so with that said, we are working hard with respect to member engagement, and also with respect to coalition building, the NFIB on the line here, the Maryland Truckers Association, and other consumer groups, to try to make sure that they understand what's happening and that they'll be able to engage when appropriate. Another thing we're doing is, again, holding TCI accountable. They have been less than transparent from claiming a number of open meetings, open hearings, when really at the time they rolled this MIOU out, those meetings up the Northeast could be counted on a hand, and some of them were called within 48-hour notice. So I think it's important to keep them real and keep the transparency button on them. Again, I think that's key. So with that said, I think it's a real issue. Even as we know today, and we do have regular calls with PMA execs up the Northeast, we don't know what they're doing. They seem to be continuing to say they're working on something. Our question back to them is with who? Who are you working with? What are you talking about? Who's involved in these conversations? And those are questions that have not produced any answers to date. So real issue, not going away. I do think the new timeline that was laid out is probably real, and it's time in the fall right now that we need to refocus on TCI and its impact to the industry and teasing out answers to important questions. I believe, and I think the industry will serve itself if we can push this dialogue, what they're doing, and its impact into the public voice. It's when we get a surround sound of the positives that they plan to use this new tax money on is when I think we're backslided a little bit. With respect to Delaware and Maryland, they weren't on the list. We have met with both secretaries, met with Secretary of DENREC in Delaware, met with Secretary of Environment here in Maryland, continue to push for information. Our last conversation, I never like to talk in absolutes with the Secretary of Delaware, is that it was something they were hesitant on and had not planned to sign the MOU. That's as we knew it in January. I think Mike attended that meeting with me. With respect to Maryland, I think they're actively engaged in dialogue with TCI, and I think how they proceed going forward is a very unanswered question at this time. I can tell you that it does make a difference when distributors and suppliers and business owners engage at the highest level in what they're entitled to, and that's a conversation with their governor, chief executive officer, to talk about its impact and really raise critical questions. So Eric, I'm around to answer any questions that may come about, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Ellen, thank you, and we will take questions. I will ask questions at the end for all, so all three panelists will have an opportunity to weigh in. So with that, Mike, the floor now, sir, is yours.
All right. Well, look, good morning, everybody. Appreciate all of you taking the time to join us here this morning. Let's make sure that I got this set up correctly. Look, you've heard some fantastic information so far this morning about the manufacturer side, the distributor side, and how the TCI program may impact them. So how does TCI impact the average small business owner and their customers, frankly, you and I? According to NFIB, which is the country's largest small business advocacy organization, we are the only countrywide organization that caters specifically to your small mom and pop independently owned businesses. Small businesses, frankly, we are right smack dab in the middle of this process. And by virtue of that fact, so are their customers, you and me. So as you've heard, the centerpiece of TCI is a quote cap and invest program, but that is a carbon tax by any other name. Let's get that right. So NFIB, we filed comments on the draft MOU on January 9th. Our comments really focused on the various clauses contained in the MOU. Most troubling, at least in my opinion, is the second resolving clause, which states, the signatory jurisdictions will seek to implement a regional cap and invest program through the implementation of individual programs in each signatory jurisdiction that will ensure emissions reductions and enable signatory jurisdictions to strategically invest in programs to help their residents transition to affordable, low-carbon transportation options. So the words strategically invest in programs make it clear this tax and spend program is a revenue generating one. And as is the case with any tax and spend program, there are winners and there are losers. The winners in this case are those that benefit from the payments, and the losers are those who pay, i.e. you and me. How much? Well, we estimated at NFIB about $4 billion with a B. And that's creating the possibility of gas price increases anywhere from 5 to 17 cents per gallon. So NFIB and our friends at MAPTA, Ellen Valentino, we polled Marylanders on TCI, and the results are striking, frankly. 73% reject increasing the gasoline tax in Maryland to fight climate change. Further, 78% oppose the idea of Maryland being part of a group that would have the authority to restrict the sale of gasoline, because that's what TCI does. Simply just look through the MOU. Their whole goal is to eventually get to this, quote, low carbon emitting alternative. Well, right now, our friends in the trucking industry would certainly argue that diesel is the most affordable, cost-effective way to get goods and services to and from our customers. So the question I posed at the top, how does TCI impact small businesses? And the answer is very simple, a lot. You know, businesses rely on our transportation infrastructure to get their goods to and from their customers. Even businesses in the service industries like construction, trades, and transport, those that have, you know, an entire fleet of vehicles, they will have increased costs. And those cost increases cannot simply happen in a vacuum. You know, they are by and large passed down to their clients and customers. So that means that the cost of goods and services will go up. There's no other way around it. And finally, going back to NFIB's comments on the MOU, frankly, we raised constitutional questions about this multi-state specifically the potential violation of the compact and commerce clauses. You know, it's kind of ironic. You can even just a simple Google search and you say NFIB comments on TCI, and we'll take you to TCI's website. And there you will see the comments that our legal counsel filed on the MOU. I really urge you to take a look at those if you want to understand further the impact that the cap and invest, the tax and spend program that TCI envisions. If you want to see the impact that will have on small businesses, which, by the way, employ 50% of the labor workforce throughout the country. So we're talking about a large constituency of commerce that will be drastically impacted if TCI were to become a reality. You've heard from the other panelists on the timeline. You know, at NFIB, not only did we submit comments nationally, but in Maryland, Delaware, where I work, you know, the Maryland legislature, the state legislatures in Annapolis and Dover, there's certainly a contingency of elected officials that want to move forward with TCI and RGGI, come hell or high water, the costs be damned. But, you know, as I've illustrated in my presentation, there are costs. You know, the losers, quote unquote, are those of us, you and me, that have to pay for this. So again, I'll stop there. I look forward to any questions. Again, I encourage you to look at our comments if you want a better idea of how TCI impacts a small business, the end users included. So I appreciate the time, and I really appreciate the Eastern Energy Expo for inviting me to come on and participate in this panel. It's been great.
Thank you, John, Mike, and Ellen. I am going to ask the first question, and it's open to all three of you. TCI is a regional initiative specific to the Northeast. Will a Trump or Biden White House have any effect on whether this initiative gains or loses momentum?
I'll just take that one first. You know, I'm going to say, I would think that the initiative has momentum regardless. I mean, the irony that two Republican governors have signed on to this initiative here in the Northeast, I think speaks to that in and of itself. So I would think that the foot on the gas doesn't lift one way or another, particularly as it relates to the Northeast. To the contrary, given the makeup of the Northeast and that it leads more blue than red, I think that you will see, if Trump is elected, a push to want to run faster and harder with this initiative. So those are my thoughts on Mike and John. I don't know if you have others.
Yeah, Ellen, I think you're absolutely correct. Particularly if a Trump administration sees a second term, the governors and their administrations that make up this pack right now, yeah, absolutely, we'll pick up this ball and run with it. I mean, we've, just frankly, just pick an issue between federal and state governments, and you'll see governors and largely blue states just picking up any ball that they want and running with it. So I think, when it comes to something like TCI, absolutely. Now, if there's a Biden-Harris administration, that may change. I think, if there is a new administration, they'll have their hands full with so many other things that, I still don't see. The governors in this TCI pack kind of deferring to the federal government. So I think either way, the folks at TCI will keep pushing it. I just think it might be louder if there was a second term of the Trump administration.
John?
Yeah, I would just echo what my fellow panelists said. As I said in my presentation, the whole TCI program really was launched at the United Nations Climate Conference in Bonn, Germany, where those governors cited a lack of federal leadership on the climate issue. And so, in addition to that, you saw a number of governors announce that they were creating something called the U.S. Climate Alliance, where individual states have come together to try and arrange their economies in such a way that they would still be compliant with the principles of the Paris Climate Accord. So yes, if Trump is reelected, I think it'll be full steam ahead on a lot of this stuff. And then, similarly, if Joe Biden were to win, I think it's pretty clear that the Democratic Party has become a lot more progressive on issues of energy and climate in the last few years. And if you just look at the climate policy released by Joe Biden's campaign, you'll see they want to achieve carbon neutrality in the electric power sector by 2035. They want to transition drivers from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. And so I think you're going to see continued momentum amongst the governors in the Northeast, similar to what a Biden administration would probably pursue at the federal level.
And for those of you who were not with us when we discussed Northeast climate policy at the state level on Tuesday of this week, you're hearing the same answer that was given in that context, which is the states are really out. The blue states in the Northeast, as well as the West Coast and elsewhere throughout the country, are really driving this, and it really doesn't matter. I mean, we have Trump in the White House now, and we're dealing with this. So please be not to say that it doesn't matter who wins, but relative to these types of issues on carbon policy broadly, whether it's in the building sector or the transportation sector, I think you've seen the direction the states in the Northeast are going. Next question. Can TCI be effective if there is only a 50% acceptance in the states that are part of it?
Well, I'll take a quick stab at that, and I'll go back to one of the last points. Frankly, whether it's 50 or 60 or 75% of the states that are in the pack now, really picking up the mantle. I think the broader point, as we illustrated in our comments, is I think there are serious constitutional questions, impacting a regional group that are trying to institute a tax scheme that crosses state boundaries. But, directly to the question of 50% only actually go through, once the final MOU is published and we have a game plan in front of us. Honestly, I think it just kind of collapses, because at that point, as I pointed out in NFIB and MAPTA, we did some polling. I think at that point, groups like ours and AFPM and other groups in the industry will really start educating not only our clients and our members, et cetera, but educating the public in general, just what exactly is this TCI. So the glass half full in me is frankly thinks that if only half of these states continue pushing on, that it'll just collapse under its own pressure. I hope I'm right. But.
Right. I agree. The one thing I will add, though, I'm not sure it collapses. I think this concept collapses. I think that this will morph into something similar, goal-like, and it's going to be interesting to see how that happens. I think we've already seen something outside of TCI that to me looks like it. I call it a difference, a distinction without a difference. But people do disagree with me when this host of governors signed the pledge to, eliminate trucks that run on diesel. Governor Hogan, again, was a signatory of that, as was Charlie Baker. This issue and us having to deal with it, whether it's a Northeast policy or going to be with us for a long time.
Eric, I think you used the word effective. Can this be effective if states drop out? And effective is kind of a funny word in a sense. I would go back to what Mike said in his prepared remarks about this being a revenue generating scheme more than an environmental scheme. If you remember in my presentation, they want to see a 20 to 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions between 2022 and 2032, but with the 19% business as usual scenario in there, really that would only be a 1 to 6% reduction in addition to what is currently anticipated, right? So, I mean, if the goal is to reduce emissions in the transportation sector, then I'm not so sure that the TCI program as currently envisioned does a great job of that. So if fewer jurisdictions participate, they'll obviously generate less revenue. Interestingly, there have been discussions in Massachusetts where really the TCI program is really started, right? So I'm not familiar with the specifics, but my understanding is that Massachusetts is actually under a court order to implement some sort of program to wring greenhouse gas emissions out of their transportation sector. And the ideal way from their perspective to go about doing that is to bring a number of other states on board in neighboring jurisdictions to do that. But Massachusetts, in the legislature, they have discussed the fact that a number of policymakers have expressed skepticism or outright opposition to this program, and have discussed possible Plan B scenarios. And some of those Plan B scenarios would be to maybe link Massachusetts and any other interested states to what they're doing in California, or even some provinces in Canada, believe it or not. So even if the TCI program as currently envisioned were to not happen, I think you will still see states like Massachusetts and maybe other similar states pursue alternative arrangements.
Thank you. Who, assuming TCI is adopted and implemented, what is the enforcement mechanism for TCI?
Well, I think if it's adopted, it's going to depend on the state too. I think there's going to be what I'm going to call an entity that will hold states accountable to the agreement which they signed. I do. A regional entity. I do. And then as far as enforcement, I think it's going to be relevant to the way the states are going to, how the states are going to handle it. I think MDE in Maryland will be the enforcement. I think in Delaware, it'll be DENREC. So I think there'll be both a regional enforcement component that's going to hold states accountable to their commitment. And then I think there'll be individual state enforcement entities. Mike, I don't know, John, if you feel differently.
No, I agree completely. I mean, it will be up to those EPA-like state agencies to enforce this. And from a regional standpoint, I almost see it just kind of flowing upward. These states report out, and then there's, you get grades, as the various groups, whenever they put out legislative report cards, this TCI will put out a state report card and see how we're doing, and the various states will take that and do with it what they will. But in terms of enforcement, yeah, I do believe it'll be up to the individual states.
Okay. What can the individual marketers that are participating in the session today do to affect the outcome of this? Do we reach out to the governor? Do we reach out to our customers, asking them to reach out? Is there a central clearinghouse that we can direct people to? How can we get more engaged in trying to stop this?
Well, I think from our perspective, you most have, one of the first hurdles we had as an association is making sure the marketers were educated, knew what was going on. The issue can be intimidating in and of itself, the processing. So you got to make sure that you are engaged and educated on what exactly this is. There is a host of ways you can get involved. You should be communicating with the governor and your elected officials. You should comment. There have been comment periods. I know the associations up the Northeast, not just myself, have put out talking points for marketers to be able to communicate and comment, and don't give up the ship. If you get a call from the association to attend a meeting, to comment, to participate, it's going to be critical that you take that where it is. Additionally, we're looking for ways and marketers to speak to the media, to be as involved as they can be on this. That in and of itself, again, can be an issue because, they don't want their company out there fighting against the good of what this is shrouded in. But education and rise to the call of your association. Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, that's perfect marching orders for our audience, and frankly for our group's members is just to get involved, get educated. Ellen always does just a fantastic job getting her membership in front of the policymakers. At NFIB, we do the exact same thing. Educating our members and then getting them ready to speak confidently to their elected officials and let them know, hey, look, I employ, 20 of your constituents. I'm a constituent, and this is how this is going to impact me.
Right.
One thing I always like to say, whether I'm in Annapolis or Dover, to our members is know your numbers. Not to shame Ellen or I, but our legislators, our policymakers are always hearing from the likes of Ellen and I, and we speak in mostly top line kind of language, but when we bring members and they open up their books, their ledgers, and they show, hey, look, if you do this, if you pass this policy, whether it's TCI or whatever else it may be, this is the direct impact it's going to have on me. I'm going to have to raise my costs. I'm going to have to cut back on hours or whatever it may be. Obviously, we're talking about something that could have a negative impact, but just in the future and just a larger pitch, even if it's something for the good for your business and your bottom line, make sure that they know that too. So Alan is exactly right. Get educated and get involved and heed the call of your associations.
And I just want to add something. I just want to add something. There are issues, and then there's line in the sand issues. This is a line in the sand issue for our industry, I think, up the Northeast. This is an initiative that seeks to put you out of business. It's as clear as that. That is the goal. That's what the governor signed. That's what, there's no getting around it. That's what this commitment was, reduce the sale of what you go to market with. And I think this is a line in the sand issue. And I would not be supporting anybody that doesn't give you the 15 minutes to talk about it, and you seek their commitment to stand with you. I'm just strong.
So I would agree with everything that Ellen and Mike said. It sounds like a number of the organizations represented on this panel have been engaged as far as participating in public comment periods and formal comment periods through the Georgetown Climate Center and TCI. I don't know if there'll be another formal comment period to give everybody another stat to comment on this stuff once the final MOU is released and the model rule is released. So as I said in my presentation, as of now, and this again, it could all change because of what impact COVID is having on everything. But as of now, we expect that model rule to be presented to the states by December 31st of this year. And then 2021 will be when the states implement trying to implement the program. And so in some states, that'll be done presumably legislatively. And so just like any other piece of legislation that any concerned citizen or concerned organization might be affected by, they can engage in the legislative process, speak at the committee level, meet with lawmakers, and that sort of thing. And then similarly, if states attempt to join TCI via administrative rule or via a regulatory process, then hopefully, presumably, there would be a public comment period as a part of that rulemaking process that would give the general public as well as affected entities an opportunity to voice their concerns on the proposed plan.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are just about at an hour, and I will check one last time to see if any further questions. Thank you all. Those were excellent questions, and many of them. That I see nothing else in the queue. So I will take this opportunity to thank John, Ellen, and Mike for a very substantive and engaging discussion here this morning, and know that this is all part of, as I call it, the initiative to electrify everything, because the talk about where this invest, i.e. spend the money that they're taxing us and putting into a big pot, is going to go to funding electric vehicles, funding mass transit, bike paths, all of those types of initiatives. So it is part, well, electrification wasn't discussed today to the extent we discussed it on Tuesday relative to the overall carbon policies. It's very clear that this is an element of that larger initiative by many, if not most, of the governors in the Northeast, in the Pacific West, and in a growing number of states. So this concludes our program for today. Thank you all. We'll be back Monday. We have a program that we spent the past number of days talking about policies as they relate specifically to us in our industry and the very real threats we face in the here and now. On Monday, we're talking about threats that you also face in the here and now from merely being an employer. So we're going to be discussing initiative changes in federal law, and more importantly, state law as it relates to employment law. Obviously, there'll be a little different wrinkle on things from state to state, but overall, you're seeing a general theme in employment law, and that's what we're going to be discussing on Monday. So we often get caught up in our silo with environmental matters, tax matters, things of that sort. At the end of the day, when we're done with all those headaches, we still have the headache of being in business and having to deal with the legislatures. I can tell you in the past year in New Jersey, I'll probably spend more time on labor-related issues than I have on environmentally related issues. And that's only because on the environment, it's just we're fighting electrify everything, and it's the biggest thing that threatens us, and it's very tangible. But we're also spending a lot of time on labor-related initiative that impacts us just as being employees first.
Welcome to my foxhole.
Yes,
Yes, that's
precisely.
right.
We work closely with NFIB in New Jersey, as Ellen does in Maryland and Delaware. So thank you all. Reminder that this session will be hosted on the Eastern Energy Expo's website, this recording for the month of August, and then beginning in September, we're going to move it to our YouTube channel where it will be housed in perpetuity of the universe. So thank you all. Have a safe and enjoyable
Thanks,
week.
Eric.
Godspeed to you and your families, and we'll see
Thank you.
at 10 a.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.